So I read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and this is a very esteemed book and a classic. And, I searched on Google, and it's apparently because the author validates and reassures young women in the 60s, which was when this book was published, that their thoughts and feelings of depression, anxiety, mood swings, and other symptoms of mental disorders that I'm not certified to diagnose were not uncommon. And Plath does that by being very honest about her own journey through mental illness. And even though this book is technically fiction, it's semi-autobiographical. Anyway, let me introduce you to Esther Greenwood. The book starts off with this college girl on scholarship. And before I get further into this, even though all I did was introduce her name so far, let me warn you, some details I mentioned might be a bit off because I have terrible memory and attention span, My brain is like MS Word autosave, except instead of autosaving, it auto-deletes information from my brain. So I might miss a lot of details from the book. I'm just, warning you beforehand that I'm an idiot. And unlike me, Esther Greenwood is very smart and intelligent and brainy, which all mean the same thing. But here's another fact about her, and that fact is that she is very unlikable, which is not a problem at all because she's not meant to be liked. She's written to be relatable, not likable, which is harder to do as a writer, to write a relatable character, but Plath accomplishes that very well, creating a character who the reader can empathize with, which is more difficult than simply writing a Mary Sue. And let me tell you, Esther is the opposite of Mary Sue. She is the epitome of the opposite of Mary Sue, so much so that her name should be freaking divorce removal jurisdiction. The progression of her mental illness worsening reminded me of The Shining in a way. So in The Shining, the protagonist is the daddy character, Jack Torrance, whose name I thought was Johnny for a long time because of that "Here's Johnny" scene from the movie. Even though I read the book. Because as I said, I'm a fucking idiot and my brain is complete shit. And the beginning of Shining feels seemingly peaceful, with a job interview at the Outlook Hotel. At least in the book, it's not too weird. But in the movie, you see Jack Nicholson's face and you know immediately that shit's gonna go down because that smile is not the smile of the same person. But I'm just gonna compare the books. And in the book, he's pretty normal. But as you continue reading, something seems off, and it's a constant guilt that he expresses about physically harming his kid Danny. The memory just keeps haunting him, and in those moments you know that this character isn't fully right in the head. And it's the same with The Bell Jar. If you ignore the first sentence of the book, which refers to some public execution, and which is good because it sets the tone for the entire book. But anyway, ignoring that, she's accepted into this university that's providing her with fancy hotels and dinners, and she should be enjoying her university life. But on page 3, she thinks, "I felt very still and very empty, the way the eye of a tornado must feel, moving dully along in the middle of the surrounding hullabaloo." From the sentence, you can surmise that, like Daddy Jack from The Shining, she is fucked. Her inability to just enjoy the pleasant things around her, not even enjoy, just not be freaking miserable. Everyday people don't normally feel this overwhelming sense of emptiness. So something is definitely off here. And throughout the book, you watch her as she descends into full-on depression. But of course, she does not go mad all by herself. Life throws her the 13 reasons why here and there, and that will make her spiral faster. And I don't know if this one thing in particular is one of the reasons, but one time she third wheels. And this is no average third wheeling. It is intense third wheeling. It's like a sport. It was so extreme that I felt secondhand depression from reading this. So she's hanging out with her friend Doreen and Lenny, and she writes, "There is something demoralizing about watching two people get more and more crazy about each other, especially when you are the only extra person in the room." Also, above this passage, she feels herself shrinking to a small dot as if she's a hole in the ground. And I think the Oxford Dictionary should change their definition of third wheeling to this sentence in their idiom dictionary. And another thing, as I kept reading, it became very obvious that she really hates short men. She's so mean to this one guy, Kevin, and he he first just appears, and all he did was appear, exist in time and space, and she immediately goes. He's the type of fellow I can't stand. He hasn't done anything at this point. He's literally just standing right there, not even making a move on her, I don't think. And I'm 5'10" in my stocking feet, and when I'm little, and when I'm with a little man, I stoop over. Okay, so she's tall, and she prefers tall men, and that's fine, but there's no need to be disgusted by the mere existence of this one short dude. And apparently, if there's anything that she looks down on, it's a man in a blue outfit, and it just makes her laugh. But I doubt that. I'm not saying that she's a liar. She's so painfully honest, actually, but I'm pretty certain that if this guy were 8 feet tall and he was wearing all blue with a blue like tank top hat, like a leprechaun, but blue instead of green, she would have said something like, "Oh, his bell-bottom blue jeans were so dreamy, they accentuated his long legs that stretched for miles, and his magician's hat, the shade of deep parts of the ocean, they were like a mirror into my sexuality and my soul, because I often feel blue myself." Finally, he's leaving, and she says that she couldn't see him clearly because the place was dim. She says it's because it was dim, but we all know you didn't see him because he's short. I mean, you could see other people, couldn't you? But yeah, I'm grilling her too hard. But one thing that legit bothered me for some reason, I don't know why that could be, was her racism toward Asians. Yeah, one time she looks in the mirror, she looks in the elevator mirror, and she sees this gross, ugly Chinese woman literally writing, "I noticed a big smudgy-eyed Chinese woman staring idiotically into my face. Blah, 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 blah. How wrinkled and used up it looked like." She was appalled to see. And in the beginning, I mentioned that this book was relatable. And this passage right here is why it was relatable to me. I have on so many occasions looked into the mirror and thought the same thing. I go, "Oh, what an ugly-ass Asian bit person." So I guess she gets a point here for being relatable. But jokes aside, she is basically using Chinese as an adjective to describe how ugly she looks, and it wasn't great. I'm Korean, but it's racism against Asians, and it's not great at all. So yeah, it bothered me, and I hate this book, and I hate my life. I hate everything. I hate myself. Such an idiot. Anyway, back to the main point of this book, which is mental illness. So Esther she's generally a cold person, but there is a sense of empathy left in her at this point, in the very beginning. But I don't blame her for her overall cold, aloof behavior toward her peers and her friends and her family, because that's a symptom of mental illness. It's not her fault. Racism is her fault, but not depression. And it's her honesty that made this book loved by so many, I mean, I didn't love it. Maybe it's because of the Chinaman thing, but I see why people do so far. And another thing is she's obviously very competent and intelligent and clever and smart and not stupid and not dumb, but she feels inadequate compared to her peers, even though there's solid evidence that she's actually smarter than her peers. And this was another sign of where her mentality was at this moment in the book. But you have not seen anything yet. When she gets rejected from a writing course, shit hits the fan. The rejection is the trigger to what would spiral into this full-on depression, psychosis, dissociation, splitting, because that was her dream, her emptiness and loneliness, that depression, that depressed people often have. It hinders people from having a clear sense of self, which is what keeps the average people sane in this world. And reading and writing and becoming a poet was the identity that she was forced to form for herself, because her mental illness prevented her from having a natural, healthy, identity. It's how she maintained her depression to some extent, and it's how many people with mental disorders are living now. And here it says, "All through June, the writing course had stretched before me like a bright, safe bridge over the dull gulf of the summer. And now that it's gone, she doesn't know who she is anymore. She's already absolutely miserable, and she hates everything, but now she thinks that she has nothing to live for anymore, and that she feels it tottering and dissolving in her body in a white blouse and a green skirt, plummet into the gap. And by the way, this white blouse and green skirt is the second protagonist here. From this on, it's the only pieces of clothing that she mentions wearing. I don't think she ever washes it. Like, she really starts to dissociate here, and you can tell that she lost herself because she begins to describe herself in a sort of third person perspective. She says her voice sounded strange, like she was beginning to not recognize herself. It's like hearing your voice recorded and thinking, like, who the fuck does that terrible voice belong to? And it's you. But she's experiencing this 24/7 now in real lifetime. After this inciting incident, there are signs after signs of her mental deterioration. You know, she rejects social events. One time she crawls under a mattress, like not under a blanket, but a literal mattress. And another one is when she's trying to write her thesis paper but doesn't know what to write, so she starts writing nonsense, and that is perfectly normal. But what made this insane was that she counted the nonsense letter by letter, which was like 100 words. And it's not like right now when you have MS Word and you just drag your mouse over the paragraph and the little box on the left corner, it tells you like how many words that contains. She's using a typewriter and she counted the words out one by one. That's the crazy part here. Not writing nonsense while writing a thesis paper. That's normal. Anyway, other signs are that she begins having terrible insomnia and trouble reading and writing, which is like adding fuel to a fire because that's who she is a writer, and writers are automatically readers. If you're not a writer, you can't be a writer. What? No. If you're fucking stupid. If you're not a reader, you can't be a writer. It's what Stephen King said. Stephen King said that, yeah. So she stops washing her clothes and says that the sour smell gives her a friendly vibe. And if someone ever says that their unwashed, fungi-covered, moldy t-shirt gives a friendly vibe, you know something isn't right. And she just doesn't care for her body hygiene anymore, which I guess you can check OCD off the list, but honestly, I don't know because I'm not a doctor. And she also starts showing symptoms of paranoia, where she comes to these conclusions in her mind about people's intentions, which are mostly bad, without any solid evidence. And so she goes to a family doctor. She tells them about her insomnia to the family doctor, and this isn't addressed in the book, obviously, because it's from Esther's point of view, but the doctor probably did see her unwashed hair and, you know, noticed the sour and friendly odor of her infamous white blouse and green skirt. Then the doctor sends her away to a psychiatrist. Yeah, who gives her shock therapy and traumatizes her. Obviously not helping. But at this point, there is still a sense of sanity left in her because she's still showing some self-awareness in her deteriorating mental health. And she knows that people might notice or distinguish her current self from her like old self. So not everything is bad here. We have not lost hope. It's rainbows and sunshine. And anyway, she tries to kill herself. She overdoses on drugs. And I haven't looked into Sylvia Plath's life story too much, but I do know how she passed away, which was by taking her own life. But I don't know if the writer has ever overdosed on pills and had gotten sent to the emergency room. But Esther's experience here at the ER after the suicide attempt, where her family visits her, where she's unconsciously crying for her mom, who comes and comforts her, and the hospital staff judging her and being mean and treating her like some zoo animal, it was so real. It was heartbreaking and it was so real. And after this, she gets admitted to a psychiatric ward where her signs of paranoia are shown even more blatantly. And there is this one part of the book that disturbed me the most and made me emotionally turn away completely from the book and Esther. It's a scene at the hospital and this black person appears. I understand that this was the 60s, and me being in the 21st century, 2023 right now, maybe I'm not allowed to be mad about it, which is why I sort of overlooked her saying Chinaman because, you know, racism was normal, sexism was normal, which is what she's fighting against here, you know, sexism. But this part is so disgusting. It's impossible not to be bothered, let alone choose to overlook. So apparently this nurse who's on food cart duty or just the worker, is usually it's this old white man, but he's not here yet that day. So instead, this black person appears to serve the hospital patients, food and then clean up afterwards. And this guy's black because the sentence starts off with the N-word wheel the food cart into the patient's dining room. And every other sentence where she's addressing him, she addresses him as the N-word with capital N in an obviously condescending tone that differs from the rest of her prose. The vocabulary she chooses to write to describe whatever he was doing was clearly mocking him, and her hatred is so clear here. And I know that she's not in her right mind, and she has mental illness, and that's why she's in the mental ward right now. But when he starts to collect the empty dishes, Esther tells him that people are still eating. And then Sylvia Plath writes here, here's what she writes on page 140. This dialogue I highlighted so that I don't have to read it, and that he widened his eyes in mock wonder. And also before that, she mentions his big rolling eyes. It's a typical old-timey like racist stuff with their eyes really big, and I feel like it's something that Lovecraft would have really enjoyed. It's right up his alley. And then the N-word makes an insolent bow. Miss Mucky Mug, he said under his breath. So the part where she thinks that he's trying to push the patient's limits and annoy them is not out of character for a person in a mental ward. So that part didn't bother me. She thinks this way about everyone else, so like no matter their race. And maybe the blatant, disgusting, descriptive racism here is in character too, since she showed a part of it at the beginning with Asians, but then she physically hurts the black guy by kicking his foot when he's cleaning the plates and just, doing his job. Here she actively hurts someone and then says, "That's what you get," while looking him in the eyes. So this book is praised for being this revolutionary feminist piece of writing. She's a victim of patriarchy, and especially with the way that mentally ill women were treated, or just women who happen to show emotion sometimes. That resulted in women hurting themselves, and that's what they usually do. Instead of hurting other people, they mostly hurt themselves. They shrink back and they can't fight back, which I completely understand since the repercussions are awful. But here, it's so clear what a hypocrite she is, and it's why I don't love this book. She obviously thinks that she's above this black man, literally infantilizing him with his repulsive dialogues, and she knows that he can't fight back, just like how she couldn't fight back to those men. To those, white men, and she's using her privilege to do basically what the white men were doing to white women. And after this, she does another thing to cause harm, but this time it's against a white female nurse, and she's white by default because she doesn't address her as the N-word. And Esther doesn't hurt her physically, and instead she kicks over this tray of important medicine or something to just mess with the nurse. So it's not physical, but it's so annoying. Then she apologizes. And it's obviously a fake apology. She knows that they know that she did this on purpose. She's like, "Oh, sorry, it was an accident." But, compare this response to her previously staring at the black man in the eye, doing his job, and saying, "That's what you get." So yeah, she stopped being relatable at this point, except this one part where the female psychiatrist who Esther trusts kind of betrays Esther by arranging a shock therapy without warning her first, which the doctor promised not to do, knowing Esther's trauma with shock therapy. And Esther is all crying, and here I felt kind of bad. I did feel kind of bad. My heart was like, oh, this poor racist bitch. Oh, yeah, she feels so betrayed. But it goes well. She regains her trust with this doctor, and who handles it so much better. At this point, you've hit the climax of the story, and the story is settling down. It's time for some improvement, which does happen. She gets better and better, and almost near the final chapter, she loses her virginity, but it's really bad. She just bleeds a lot, and I'm not even sure if she actually lost it because she just starts bleeding so much. So I guess the message of this book here is don't lose your virginity or else you'll bleed to death. But really, all jokes aside, again, it's frustrating how she's treated by the hospitals who ignore this medical emergency because they think it's some female menstrual cycle thing. And then it's my personal favorite passage of this story. It's referring to her past. She's gotten better, and everything that's happened in her past, the sexual abuse, her overdose, shock therapy, and trauma, and back when she was in school, which feels like such a long time ago, she remembers everything like a bad dream, but she doesn't want to treat it like a bad dream. She doesn't want to forget everything, and she writes, maybe forgetfulness, like a kind snow, should numb and cover them, but they were part of me. They were my landscape. And this really resonated with me because what you have accumulated in the past is what makes you right now. I am here right now because of the things that happened in my past. Like earlier today, I went to the library, I met with a friend. I have wanted to get like a lobotomy in the past to completely erase some memories that I have, but even if I no longer remember those events, it won't help me. It won't make me better. They'll always be part of who I am, and my unconscious behaviors and thoughts and thought patterns will be reflections of those erased memories. So there's no point in forgetting them. Instead, like she said, it's my landscape, and Esther admits that she feels like she's entering a new phase. And maybe in this phase, she won't be a racist bitch. The book ends with her going through this door, like to an interview to see whether she's fit to go back into the real world and out of the psychiatric hospital. I think it's a great ending. Also, it's an open ending, like in the Inception movie, like choose your own ending kind of thing. And upon closing this book, theoretically, since I read it on Kindle, it made me think how many people out there are just raw dogging it in the world at life without any psychiatric help or being in the psych ward. Like, how many people out there just going through life day by day, going to work or unable to go to work, just completely raw dogging it, and how are they holding up?